The universe, in its boundless wisdom, writes its laws in fire and light. It builds symphonies of fusion in distant nebulas and sings with the rotation of pulsars. But in the forgotten ink-black corners between the epochs, the universe keeps its secrets. It writes its laws in silence. And its most profound secret, its cruelest masterpiece, is Xylos 9. It was not a world. It was an absence. A void given form, a planet-sized predator whose only prey was energy. The crew of the Eventide had called it the Silent Planet in their initial sensor readings, a name that seemed poetic until they learned its truth. On Xylos 9, sound did not echo. It was suffocated. The wind did not howl. It simply pressed, a physical weight of cold that promised oblivion. But the true horror was not the silence. It was the thirst. The planet's atmosphere, a churning, invisible soup of a compound the ship's computer had grimly labeled cryo-arrest, acted as a perfect thermal sink. It didn't just get cold. It enforced cold. It stole heat at the quantum level, leaching warmth from any source with a terrifying, absolute efficiency. It was a prison designed to hold light itself. This was the truth Kalen Reed was currently facing. He stood in the jagged wound of the Eventide's hull, the wreck of their science vessel half buried in a field of impossible static blue ice. He raised the plasma welder, a tool designed to cut through starship armor, a focused beam that burned hotter than a small sun. He braced himself and pulled the trigger. A brilliant, violent spark of purple-white energy erupted from the nozzle, and in the exact same microsecond it vanished. It didn't fade. It was not diffused. It was stolen. It was as if the atmosphere itself had reached out with a billion invisible greedy fingers and snuffed it out like a candle flame. He tried again, his jaw tight. Flash. Gone. Again. Flash. Gone. The metal of the hull, which should have been glowing white-hot from the effort, remained stubbornly coated in frost. He slammed his gloved fist against the bulkhead. The sound was a dull, unsatisfying thud. The planet had even stolen the energy of his anger. He sealed the breach, the hiss of the airlock sounding unnervingly loud in the dead quiet, and walked back to the medical bay. In the 72 hours since the crash, this room had become the heart of their small, dying colony of survivors. Commander Vorlag was there, standing as still as the ice outside. Vorlag was a Cygnian, a creature evolved on a moon of frozen methane, his body a beautiful crystalline lattice of silicon. To him, this planet was not agonizing. It was merely inefficient, an irritation of physics. To the carbon-based life forms around him, it was hell. Status, Vorlag's voice resonated, not as sound, but as precise modulated frequencies that translated almost painfully in Kale's ears. Power reserves are at 30 standard cycles. Life support is a closed loop, but the thermal regulators are failing. The system is hemorrhaging energy trying to maintain a baseline temperature against the planetary sink. He paused, his multifaceted eyes refracting the dim emergency lights. We cannot send a signal. The cold is dampening all frequencies. We cannot repair the hull, and we cannot generate external heat. A weak, wet cough answered him. Dr. Eris, the ship's Vesperine biologist, was curled under a pile of shimmering thermal blankets, and yet he shivered so violently it seemed his bones would break. The Vesperine were a vibrant species, a miracle of rapid metabolism, all fast-twitch muscles and warm blood. That miracle was now his death sentence. It's the food, Commander, Eris whispered, his voice thin as spun glass. He pointed a trembling, chitinous hand at the gray ration packs stacked nearby. My species. We cannot process raw protein. It requires thermal denaturing. Cooking. He looked at the nutrition bar in his hand with a profound, soul-deep disgust that transcended species. It's indigestible. It's poison to me. I am eating, Commander, and I am starving to death. This was the true, insidious nature of the trap. Xylos 9 wasn't just killing them with cold. It was killing them with rules. Kyle watched the medic's biomonitor, his engineer's mind processing the grim data. The Vesperine's organs were shutting down, one by one. He was digesting his own muscle mass to stay alive, and he was losing. They were all losing. Kale stepped forward, the grit on his boots scraping the deck. We can bypass the regulators, he said, his voice grating in the sterile air. Reroute the primary power conduit directly to the galley's induction coils. Forget warming the room, forget efficiency. Create a contained brute force resistance loop. He was thinking of the welder, of that stolen spark. We can't weld outside, but inside. If we insulate it, if we shield it from the cryo-arrest. Vorlag turned his head slowly. The gesture was the Cygnian equivalent of a profound glare. Engineer Reed, we have tried. The science team tried before we lost them on the ice. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion but heavy with certainty. The planet drinks heat. A laser, an electrical arc, a friction coil. It makes no difference. The energy differential is too great. The cryo-annihilation field leaches it through any medium, even a vacuum seal, given time. It is a law of this world. We cannot break it. Vorlag stepped closer, his own logic as cold and hard as his silicon body. Furthermore, your species has a fixation on high heat. You see it as a solution for everything. My people see it as what it is. Chaos, disorder, the enemy of structure and reason. We evolved in the perfect, stable cold, where logic prevails. To create such uncontrolled primitive energy in a desperate gamble, he gestured to the failing power cells, is not leadership. It is panic. It is the act of a mammal setting its own cave on fire for a moment's warmth. He turned to Aris. We will accept the laws of this place. We will make him comfortable. We will not hasten our own end by chasing the fantasies of fire. A sharp, piercing alarm cut through the tension. Dr. Aris had gone limp. His vital signs flatlined for a terrifying second, then returned as a shallow, thready pulse. Cardiac arrhythmia. He had slipped from consciousness into the gray twilight that precedes the end. The room fell into a new, deeper silence. The silence of accepted fate. Vorlag bowed his crystalline head. We will do what we can. It is inevitable. Inevitable. The word hung in the air, heavier than the broken ship, colder than the ice that entombed them. Kalen Reed looked at the dying Vesperine, a good man who had shared jokes with him over a mess hall table just 3 days ago. He looked at the logical, resigned Cygnian, a commander who had already accepted defeat because the rules said he must. He looked at the ration pack in his own hand, a cold, tasteless brick of survival. He felt the cold of the planet seeping through the insulated hull, a relentless, pressing hunger that demanded he lie down and join the silence. But as he stood there, he felt something else rise up to meet it. It was not panic. It was not chaos. It was a cold, quiet, and utterly human rage. It was the ancestral fury of a species that had survived ice ages by refusing to die, a species that had looked at the cold, indifferent dark and had the audacity to invent fire. Vorlag was wrong. This wasn't about panic. It was about defiance. He turned, his movements stiff. He didn't say a word. He just walked out of the medical bay, the door hissing shut behind him, leaving the others to their logic and to their prayers. He had work to do, and to their prayers. He had work to do. He did not return. For 6 hours, Kalen Reed was a ghost on the Eventide's internal sensors. The remaining crew, huddled in the relative warmth of the med bay, assumed he was grieving, or perhaps succumbing to the cold-induced apathy that preceded the end. They had forgotten the nature of their human engineer. Kale was not idle. He was in the ruined cargo bay, a place they had sealed off, deemed too structurally compromised and perilously close to the outside. He was committing sacrilege. He was tearing their ship, their only sanctuary, apart. He worked with a silent, focused ferocity, his breath pluming in the frigid air, his suit's internal heaters fighting a losing battle. He ripped out the pearlescent ceramic plating from the hull, the atmospheric entry shielding. Priceless tiles designed for one purpose, to defy heat by refusing to acknowledge it, to insulate the ship from the 3,000-degree inferno of re-entry. He salvaged the main power trunk lines, thick as a man's arm, pulling them from their frozen conduits with inhuman strength. He even cannibalized the backup battery cores from the 2 environmental suits whose owners, lost on the ice, would no longer need them. He was a thief, stealing from the dead to save the dying. It was an unauthorized power draw that finally alerted Vorlag. A tiny, insignificant fluctuation, but to the Cygnians' orderly mind, it was a discordant note in their funereal symphony. He followed the trace to the cargo bay bulkhead, the manual override groaning in protest as he forced the door. The sight that greeted him was one of profound chaos. It was, to his silicon-based sensibilities, utterly primitive. In the center of the frozen bay, lit only by his helmet lamp, Kyle was crouched over a construct of pure, functional ugliness. It was a box, barely a meter square, cobbled together from the jagged, mismatched ceramic tiles. It was wrapped in snaking coils of power cabling, looking less like advanced technology and more like some frantic pagan effigy to a forgotten god of scrap. "What have you done?" Vorlag's voice was dangerously quiet, the frequency vibrating with controlled rage. "You are wasting precious energy. You are accelerating our demise. The planet drinks heat, engineer. It will drink this too, and you will have drained our batteries for nothing." Kale didn't look up, his gloved hands twisting a final heavy connector. "I'm not trying to boil the ocean, Commander. You are acting like a child." Vorlag strode forward, his crystalline form radiating a disapproval colder than the air. "This is the human heresy. The belief that reality will bend if you simply rage at it hard enough. You are draining the last of our life support, the very power that keeps Dr. Eris's monitors running for this! A monument to your own denial." Kale finally stood, turning to face the Signian. His face was slick with sweat, a biological impossibility in this room. His eyes were bright, lit by that dangerous primeval fire that Vorlag so distrusted. "You're right," he said, his voice raw. "The planet drinks heat. You can't fight it. You can't win. You try to light a fire in this atmosphere, and the ocean of cold just pours in and puts it out." He tapped the ceramic box with a gloved knuckle. The sound was dull, final. "That's why you failed. You were trying to build a fire. I built a submarine." Vorlag stared, the translation software in his implant struggling with the metaphor. "You... what?" "You were trying to heat the room," Kale continued, his voice picking up speed, the words tumbling out with the force of his conviction. "I'm not even trying to heat the air inside this box. I'm creating a cage." He pointed to the ceramic tiles, their pearlescent surface seeming to mock the cold. "This shielding wasn't made to stop cold. It was made to contain fire. It was designed to insulate a re-entry vehicle from 3,000 degrees of plasma. It holds energy. It doesn't let it go." He gestured to the tangle of wires. "I'm not fighting the cryo-arrest field. I'm ignoring it. I am dumping every spare watt we have from those salvaged batteries into a resistive coil inside this insulated prison. No heat will escape. No flame will be lit. All that energy, all that chaos you hate so much, it will be trapped in a 1-meter cube with nowhere to go. It will just build." Vorlag finally understood, and he was horrified. That is madness. You'll overload the core. You'll create a concentration of energy so violent. It's wrong. It is an affront to physics." He moved to disconnect the main cable Kale had jury-rigged to the ship's grid. "I cannot allow this." Kyle moved faster. He shoved his commander. It was a shocking, brutal act of insubordination. The silicon-based Signian stumbled, his lighter, structured mass no match for the human's desperate mammalian strength. "Get out of my way!" Kale growled. "It's not madness, Commander. It's cooking." Before Vorlag could recover, Kale slammed the final heavy-gauge power connector into its socket. The act was definitive, irreversible. The lights on the Eventide did not flicker. They died. The entire ship plunged into a terrifying, absolute darkness. The hum of life support and the dim glow of the medbay monitors all extinguished. The only sound was the sudden, sharp vibration of the ship's remaining power core being drained, channeled, focused into one single point. A low, thrumming hum began, a sound that felt deeper than hearing, as if a great beast was stirring in the dark. Then, silence. The thrumming stopped. The darkness remained. Vorlag stood in the black, frozen cargo bay, his logic vindicated in the most terrible way. "You see?" he whispered, his voice resonating with the finality of death. "Nothing. You've killed us all?" But Kale didn't answer. He just stood there in the suffocating black, facing his ugly ceramic box. He was listening. He was waiting. Listening. He was waiting. A single strained gasp cut through the suffocating dark. It was Kyle. "The ship's power isn't gone, Commander," he panted, his voice ragged with effort. "It's here." From the blackness came the sound of scraping, of a heavy ceramic latch being forced open. Vorlag prepared himself for the final, cold emptiness. A pillar of pure, impossible light erupted from the box. It was not the cold, sterile blue of the Eventide's LEDs. It was a primal, terrible, golden-orange light. It punched a hole in the darkness, casting long, wavering shadows that danced like ancient spirits across the cargo bay. The air directly above the opening shimmered in protest for a single, glorious second before the planet's atmosphere ripped the escaping heat away. But the source remained. Vorlag stumbled back, his crystalline form recoiling not from the light, but from the raw, concentrated radiation of it. It was an energy his species had evolved to fear, a wave of pure chaos that felt like a physical blow. "Chaos," he whispered, his voice trembling. You have unleashed chaos." Kyle, his face illuminated in the hellish glow, his protective gloves already smoking at the seams, looked not at Vorlag, but into the port. Inside his ugly ceramic prison, there was no fire. There was no flame. There was only a 1-meter square sun. A blinding, liquid gold inferno of pure, contained energy, hotter than any forge, screaming silently in its ceramic cage. He ignored Vorlag. He grabbed the cold gray ration pack, the one meant for Eris. He slotted it into a small metal tray, and with a grunt, he plunged it into the inferno. There was a violent, explosive hiss as the frozen, sterile brick met the 3,000-degree reality. Kale slammed the port shut, and the universe plunged back into darkness. But the darkness was no longer empty. Vorlag stood frozen, his entire logical framework shattered. The darkness was no longer silent. It was expectant. And then it came. It started as a wisp, a ghost of a molecule in the sterile, recycled air. Then it grew. It was not the smell of ozone or frozen metal or the faint chemical tang of the life support. It was complex. It was savory. It was the scent of proteins denaturing, of fats rendering, of complex molecules breaking down and reforming into something new. It was the smell of caramelization. It was the smell of food. On a planet where energy did not exist, where heat was a theoretical concept, the aroma of a cooked meal was the ultimate act of rebellion. It was an impossibility given scent. It was the smell of life itself, invading the sterile tomb of Xylos 9. To Vorlag, it was the stench of entropy, of uncontrolled reactions, of decay. But to the human, it was the smell of hope. Kale waited 10 seconds. Then he opened the port again, the brief, blinding flash revealing his own grim smile. He pulled the tray out, his gloves sizzling. The gray, lifeless brick was gone. In its place was a blackened, bubbling, steaming mass that radiated a warmth so profound it felt like a dream. They ran. They ran back to the medbay, Kale cradling the superheated tray. The rest of the crew, huddled in the dark, saw them burst in, silhouetted by the dim red emergency lights that had just flickered to life on a separate, local battery. The crew didn't see the light. They smelled it. A collective animal gasp filled the room. Dr. Eris was barely breathing. Kale didn't try to feed him. He simply held the steaming, bubbling container near the Vesperine's face. Eris, lost in the twilight of starvation, inhaled. His entire body arched in a sudden violent spasm. It was a reflex, an ancient biological command. His eyes, filmed over with resignation, snapped open. They were no longer dull. They were aware. He lunged, his weak, chitinous hands grabbing the tray, and he ate. He devoured the molten hot food with a desperation that was painful to watch, choking and coughing as his ruined system tried to remember what to do, and then all eyes turned to the biomonitor. Its screen barely visible in the red gloom. The jagged, sputtering line of his heart rate. It wasn't sputtering anymore. It found a rhythm. It grew strong. The cascades of alarms for organ failure, one by one, they silenced themselves. They switched from critical red to stable, pulsing amber. The Vesperine's body, starved for so long, was finally processing. It was taking the chaotic, denatured proteins, and it was turning them into life. Aris slumped back, his breathing deep and regular for the first time in days. He looked at Kale, tears streaming down his multifaceted face, leaving shimmering trails. It's warm," he whispered, as if speaking of a myth. How? The crew, in their stunned, joyous relief, didn't see Commander Vorlag. He had stood apart, watching. Now he walked slowly toward Kyle, who was slumped against the bulkhead, his adrenaline fading, his hands shaking. The Signian stopped, his crystalline form rigid. My people. We accept the universe," Vorlag said, his voice no longer a commander's. It was the sound of a being whose entire religion had just been disproven. "We revere its laws. We find beauty in its cold, perfect logic. We believe that to exist is to submit to its truths." He turned his head, his multifaceted eyes fixing on the human. "Your species, you are an error. You are a biological exception that should not exist. You look at the universe's laws and you see suggestions. You see negotiable terms." Vorlag paused, the faint, lingering aroma of the impossible meal still hanging in the air. "I thought you were surrendering to chaos. I thought you were building a bomb to end us." He gestured toward the sleeping, living Vesperine. "But you didn't unleash chaos. You tamed it. You put a star in a box, not for war, not for power, but because someone in your pack was hungry." He looked at Kale with an expression that Kalen Reed would never be able to decipher. An expression of profound, soul-shaking terror and an even more profound, unwilling awe. "That is a logic I will never understand. And that is why your species is so terrifying." Narrator, Tales Beyond Stars. On a planet where the very air was a predator, where the laws of physics themselves had written a death sentence, the logical races of the galaxy saw an end. They saw the inevitable. A human saw a technical problem. The Signian would come to call it the furnace of heresy. The Vesperine survivors would forever call it the heart of life. To Kalen Reed, and to the species he represented, it was, and would always be, just an oven. Because in the grand, silent symphony of the cosmos, humanity will always be the discordant note, the one that refuses to play by the rules. For in the dictionary of mankind, impossible is not a decree. It is, quite simply, a dare. And there is nothing in the black of space, not the void, not the gods, and certainly not the laws of physics, that will ever be allowed to stand between a human and their duty to care for their own.